John Stott came to Wheaton College the last time he came. And he spoke in this big auditorium we have called Edmund Chapel. Seats 2,500. Place was packed. They had set up microphones along the aisles. So he spoke for 10 minutes, and then the students were able to ask him questions from the microphones, and he gave these brilliant answers. And one of the students said to him, Dr. Stott, how do you reach a postmodernist for Jesus? What I observed during that time when this was a rage, postmodernism is basically dead now, but people are still talking about it. I found that more people were talking about it than actually read about it. And you had these people pontificating and talking authoritatively about it. It was a complex thing, postmodernism. Some Christians, were trashing it. There's some good stuff in postmodernism. There was some bad stuff, damnable stuff. But to be discerning and try and be able to figure it out was important. How many of you, when the Harry Potter books came out, you had all these Christians who were hostile about Harry Potter. I got a phone call from a friend of mine, and he said, Jerry, I know you're a C.S. Lewis guy. I need your help on something. I said, yeah, well, what is it? He says, we're trying to get Harry Potter kicked out of the schools in our community, and I need you to help me. And I said, well, I haven't read them. My family read them, and they liked them. But what did you think when you read them? He said, well, I never read them. And I said, yeah, then I can help you. Get out of that controversy. You don't belong there until you've read the books. I read books that I disagree with a lot of times. I read the Communist Manifesto every 3 years just to see where America's going right now. I read books of all kinds of people. I don't like Voltaire, but I read Candide. It was one of the funniest books I ever read in my life. And the philosophy and theology in it is despicable. But nevertheless, I want to understand the other side. I want to get it. I don't spend all my time in those books. I read the books that nourish me. But I want to read those other books as well. So anyway, this guy asked, how do you reach the postmodernists for Jesus? And Stott gave a tight definition of postmodernism. He gave a tight definition of deconstructionism, which showed that it was the tip of the iceberg and that he had a lot of stuff under the surface of the water supporting his position. He'd done a lot of reading. And then he said, I think the way you reach the postmodernists for Jesus is by being an authentic person. And as soon as he said that, I went into existential despair because I'm not an authentic person. I sometimes have sharp words with people I say I love most. I sometimes do things that are unjust and unfair to other people who I care for, and I know they care for me. And I went shuffling out of that auditorium that day thinking to myself, well, I don't think I'm going to reach many postmodernists for Jesus because I'm not an authentic person. By the time I got to the narthex of that auditorium, I thought to myself, you know what? I think there's only been one. Only one person has been truly authentic. So now the whole question changes, doesn't it? How does an inauthentic person begin to reach other people? And I think we start by being honest about our inauthenticity, which means that puts us in a place where we are constantly aware of our own need. I think that we're not going to talk to people about Jesus well if we're looking down the nose at them. We're going to talk to people well if we remember we're the ones that are also in need of grace. We're the ones. And we speak with authority then. My need for Jesus is not casual, people. It is constant. Constant. I long to be fixed. I long for the day when he's going to fix me. And I want to talk out of that sense of desperation when I talk to somebody about Jesus, because if they're honest, unlike the woman at the high table meal, if they're honest, then they realize they want to know about these things. On my way here, flying here, I flew from Chicago to Zurich, Zurich to Prague, spent the night in Prague, and then got a train to Ostrava and took a car up to here. And when I was at Zurich, I was in the lounge and I was talking to this man, And he was curious about things, and he said, you know, what do I do? I said, I'm a retired professor. He said, what do you teach? I said, my degree's in philosophy of religion, but most of my academic work is on C.S. Lewis. He said, C.S. Lewis? He said, I'm a lapsed Catholic, but I remember reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that story moved me so deeply. I just was amazed about Aslan laying down his life for Edmund. And I said, you know why that story moved you so deeply? He said, no, why? I said, because it's true. It's a story of what Jesus did for us. And I'm a Christian, I said to him, because I'm aware of this brokenness. And I'm overwhelmed by the fact that God loved me enough that his son died for my sins. I put it another way. Have you ever been in a small group where you don't know these people really, and somebody says, hey, let's go around the room and let's introduce ourselves, and just to get the conversation going, let's talk about the most embarrassing thing that ever happened in our life. Have you ever been in one of those before? Why do they think we want to talk about the most embarrassing thing in our life to people we don't even know? But I remember what I used to say. I was going out on a date in college. I got to the woman's house about 5 minutes early. She met me at the door. She wasn't quite ready, so she had me sit down on the couch. I'm sitting down on the couch, minding my own business. And the young woman's mother didn't know I was sitting there, and she came walking into the living room in her underwear, pulling on her girdle. I was a PE major in college. I was amazed at the kinetic motion of this big pull. I grew up with a mother and a sister. Nobody in our family did stuff like that out in the living room of the house. And I read Miss Manners, you know, the etiquette columnist, and I never read in any of her columns what I should do in that moment. So I had to improvise, and there was good reason to do it. I put my head in my hand and I went, I can still see it. It's freeze frozen in my mind. I have pushed the delete button I don't know how many times. She catches mid-pull, has this horrified look on her face for about, 5 seconds maybe. Again, it gave new meaning to the word eternal. And she screams a blood-curdling scream and goes running out of that room. A few minutes later, the young woman comes out. She never said anything about it. Everybody in the house had to hear the scream. I saw the woman a few times later. She never brought it up. And you can bet I never brought it up. And I used to say that was my most embarrassing moment. But I've done a lot of thinking since then. And it's not my most embarrassing moment. My most embarrassing moment actually took place 2,000 years ago, when Jesus hung on a cross between heaven and earth. You want to know what my life is like? He had to do that for me. Let me never forget that he had to do that for me, so that there will come an honesty and humility about the life that I take when I go to let Ephraim be born and I share the gospel with other people. We're not above the fray. And yet his love is constant, because his love isn't contingent on our performance. And this becomes extremely important. And now we come to Paul, because we're looking for Ephraim to be born. Paul writes in Philemon 6, and I'm going to quote the NIV version, the English NIV. I've translated it myself from the Greek. And the NIV 1984 is, I think, the best translation in English. And he writes this: I pray that you will be active in sharing your faith, so that you'll have a full understanding of every good thing you have in Christ Jesus. I pray that you will be active in sharing your faith, so that you'll have a full understanding of every good thing you have in Christ Jesus. The phrase full understanding is one word in the Greek. It's epigenosko. It's the most intimate word for knowledge in Greek. It's usually used to speak of the carnal knowledge between a husband and wife. It's the level of intimacy that God is calling us to in relationship with God. And Paul's basically saying, you won't get to that level if you're not missional. I pray that you'll be active in sharing your faith so that you'll have a full understanding of every good thing you have in Christ. We'll always be back in the Goodwill hunting room or maybe in the dark room, but we won't be moving into the light room of being a wounded healer. And so consequently, if I share my faith, how am I going to grow? He's basically saying, your growth is connected to this. Dawson Trotman, who founded the Navigators, you know that group? Okay, Dawson Trotman preached a sermon once, you should look it up, Born to Reproduce. And he said a person is physiologically mature when they could reproduce physiologically, and a person is spiritually mature when they could reproduce spiritually. When they could lead a person to Christ and disciple that person so that that person could go lead another person to Christ. That's the mark of spiritual maturity, according to Trotman. I met a man named David Morgan who used to travel around America preaching with Trotman. And we had lunch together, and I said, tell me Trotman stories. And he said, well, the one I love to tell is we went to a church in the Pacific Northwest, and Trotman was introduced by the pastor as a man who led him to Christ and discipled him. Trotman gets into the pulpit and says, it's true, I led your pastor to Christ and discipled him. That's why I'm not afraid to do what I'm going to do right now, unrehearsed. He calls the pastor back to his side. And he says, point me to one person in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. He points back to Matt. Trotman says, Matt, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. He points across the way to Steve. Steve, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. He points to Lydia. Lydia, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. She points to Susan. It goes like that, 7 generations. And I heard that and I said, that is incredible. There's the tragedy of the church today. The normative has become incredible. And we're not thinking through how we can do these sorts of things, of reproducing reproducers. Matter of fact, it's interesting. I think one of the big pitfalls, if you read in 1 John 2:18, you have heard that Antichrist is coming. I tell you, many Antichrists have already come. Verse 19, they went out from us. Who's the us? The church. You've got it in Jude. There are apostates unaware in the church. And what's the characteristic of them? They're autumn trees without fruit. They look good on the outside, but there's no vitality of fruit producing in their life. Peter talks about them as hidden reefs. People get shipwrecked over them. You know, we've got these qualities for leadership in Titus and Timothy, but very seldom do churches have as a quality for leadership the things that Jesus said throughout his ministry. Come learn from me and go be deployed as a reproducer. And so you get people on a church board. They've never led anybody to Christ. They've never discipled and mentored a person, so that person's gone to lead a person to Christ. They may have real faith, but they might not. And if they don't, you wouldn't know it because you don't have that as a standard for leadership in your church. How do you bring about the change? Not by being obnoxious about it. You got to go and talk to the leadership at your church and say, we should be thinking about this. And if there's people on the board that have not got the experience, then mentor them, love them, bring about transformation with your board. And then from then on, always make it a standard of leadership that they not only have the qualities of character in Titus and Timothy, but they're people who know how to lead somebody to Christ. Otherwise, you get caught up in all kinds of weird things. And you hang rainbow flags from your church, and you do all kinds of goofy things that we have no responsibility to do. We should be loving those people and leading them to Christ, not hanging up flags and saying, your dysfunction is okay by us. We're validating it. That's not right. It's not biblical. And I think we can do this. I think we can make a difference. But how? So I pastored for a while. And every Friday night, I would meet with anybody who wanted to go out sharing Jesus. It was in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, California. If you believe in Jesus, when you die, you go to Santa Barbara. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. So Friday nights, we'd meet at 7:30, and I would give them 10 minutes instruction on how to share your faith. We would pray for 10 minutes, then we'd go to the boulevard. We have this street. I don't know if you've ever been to Barcelona, Spain. They have the Las Ramblas, or you could go to some of these places where they have these great streets with the cafes and stuff like that. You could go to Leicester Square in London. It's kind of like that too. And State Street in Santa Barbara was like that. And we'd go down to State Street and we'd share Jesus with people. And I would say to people, if you've never done this before, come with me. I'll initiate the first time, and you watch. The next time, I'll initiate, and I'll turn to you and ask you to give your testimony. The next time, you're going to initiate, and I'm going to be here to back you up. And it would go like that. And week after week, I would do that. We'd get these guys learning how to share their faith and getting past the fear factor, I don't have the gift of evangelism. I have it as a high value. If you have the gift of hospitality, do your evangelism around your table in your dining room. If you have the gift of service, get your tool chest, go down and fix the widow down the street's car and share Jesus with her when you do. If you have the gift of giving, don't just throw money at something. Go and get involved with the people you're throwing the money at so that you can share the gospel. I have learned how to share my faith by making boatloads of mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And that's okay. I mean, if it doesn't go well in your marriage, you get married and you have a little tiff with your spouse, do you say, oh, this isn't working so well, I'm never going to do this again? No, we don't do that in any other area of our life. We don't do it in our work or anything. Make a mistake, that's okay. And then learn from your mistake. Go ask forgiveness of. Anyway, we're going out on the boulevard, and this one night, these 5 men come up to me, and they said to me, we've never done this before. Can we go with you? And I say, yeah. I'm driving to the boulevard, and I'm saying, Lord, you better take charge here. What's it going to be like with 6 of us walking up to somebody and saying, can we talk to you? It's not going to go well. Lord, there's got to be a reason for this. I don't believe these things happen to us and so on. There's stuff behind it. So we're driving there, and I figure out what I'm going to do. I see 5 guys walking down the boulevard. I assume that they were students at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And in fact, they were. They're walking down the boulevard, and I say, you guys, I'm a pastor of this church up on the hill here. I've got these 5 guys with me, and can you believe it? They have never shared their faith in Christ before in their life, and they are nervous as all get out, scared stiff. Do you mind if they practice on you? But I need you to be honest with me. I need you to push back. If they say something and it doesn't make sense, you push back and make sure they really clarify it and so on. They go, yeah, we're just hanging out, no problem. 4 of the 5 came to Christ. One of the guys was Dan Gaither, and he was a fire chief. He ends up becoming the chief. He was a fire captain. He ends up becoming chief of Santa Barbara County Fire Department. He had the gift of evangelism. He becomes a lean, mean evangelizing machine. And whenever the Christian firefighters would get together, he always taught a course on how to share your faith. He's led so many people to Jesus over the years. That was the first time. We've got board members at our churches who nobody's ever mentored them. Maybe some of them are apostates unaware. But maybe some of them, nobody's ever gotten them challenged as to how they could do this. And we need to do it as tenderly and as thoughtfully and as kindly and as gently as Christ would do it. We don't want to create hostility around something so essential to the ministry of the church as this. But we can train people. If they haven't done it, then you go lead them. And you say, well, I don't know how. Then go learn how. And it can be done so simply. I'll give you some examples. I have fun with this stuff. And again, I've learned through my mistakes. So when I became a Christian, the pastor at the church that I attended, I later went on staff at that church, worked there as a college pastor for years. He said to me one time, Jerry, if God answered every prayer you prayed this last week, would there be anybody new in the kingdom? And I thought that was interesting. He says, if you're not praying for people to come to Jesus regularly, you're probably missing all kinds of opportunities that are coming up on every side. So I thought, well, that's good. I started praying. He also said, people who pray see lots of coincidences. So there was a guy, anybody could do this. I used to have working lunches when I was in Santa Barbara, and it was at this one restaurant. You get tired of the food, but you're not there for the food. You want to plant Christ's flag in that world. And so the guy who owned the place, it was a sports bar and grill called Duffy Doherty's Sports Bar and Grill. Duffy Doherty had been a famous American football coach at Michigan State University, and the guy who ran who owned the sports bar and grill had played football at Michigan State and then later played professional football with the New York Giants. His name was Brad. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to go there 4 days a week, working lunches. And I started praying for Brad every day. I always made sure I had small talk with him. Hey, Brad, did you catch the game last night? Hey, Brad, I love the mahi-mahi sandwich. I hope you keep it on the menu. Hey, Brad, how's business going? After 3 weeks, 4 days a week, small talk, I just said to him, you know what, Brad? I pray for you every day. That's as aggressive as I got, my evangelism. I've never said that to somebody and had them say back to me, well, would you stop it? Most people are happy somebody's praying for them. Next 3 weeks, small talk. 3 weeks later, hey, Brad, I pray for you every day. I said, you know, you said that a couple weeks back. I didn't really believe you were doing it, but you must be doing it if you say it again. Brad, I haven't missed. He said, Jerry, would you pray for my boys? I said, yeah, give me their names. Brad, I wrote down their names. I told my family that night that Brad asked me to pray for his boys. Alicia said, I know his one son. He goes to my school. I wish you could have been there 5 months later when one of the guys at the church brought Brad's son to the youth group. My daughter came home from the youth group and said, Dad, Brad's son came to the youth group tonight and he gave his heart to Jesus. My kids know God answers those prayers. But with Brad, it went like that every 3 weeks. There was a guy in the restaurant. I was there with my best friend, and this guy over here was sitting by himself, and my best friend knew him. We called him to our table, and we shared with him, and he gave his heart to Jesus at the restaurant. There was one of the waitresses who gave her heart to Jesus. But Brad, there's just this slow, methodical practice, and he wasn't the only guy I was doing this with. This is just one of many that I'm having these conversations with. And finally there came the day, about 9 months into it, where Brad comes up to my table and he says, Jerry, I need to talk to you after lunch. And I said, okay, Brad. I called my secretary, canceled my appointments for that afternoon. We went down to a coffee shop and he poured out his heart to me. All kinds of sadness in his life. Why is he talking to me? The most spiritual conversation we had was just, I'm praying for you. But he knew there was a person who was praying for him, and he just pours out his heart. 3 hours. And after 3 hours, he's weeping and stuff. I said, Brad, I think you need Jesus in your life. He said, I think I need Jesus too, but I don't want to give him my life like it is right now. I think I want to fix it first. I said, you could try it like that, but that's not the way it usually works. Usually you invite him in to do the fixing, and then you'll be okay. And he said, well, I'm just going to try it like this. I said, okay. And I went back to every 3 weeks, tell him I was praying for him. 5 months later, I get a phone call from Brad. Jerry, my way's not working. Can I come to your office and talk to you? I never had anybody use more Kleenex coming to Jesus than Brad did when he came to faith. You don't have to use Kleenex. There's nothing in here that says you have to use Kleenex. But he did. He wept his way into the kingdom. And we started follow-up. You know why this is important? About 6 years ago, Brad dropped dead of a heart attack. You want to know something else? I'm going to introduce you to him one day. Because this stuff matters, and it matters forever. It's really good. I was sitting at home one day, and I had Fridays off, and I'm saying, Lord, there are people on your radar screen who aren't on mine, and there are people in my world. You know how Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel. What were his circumstances when he wrote that? He was in prison. How does that work? By the end of that book, he says, the saints in Caesar's household greet you. How do he have his fingers on the pulse of the Roman Empire from a jail cell? Because he had his head on a swivel. He knew that he was there because God wanted him there for some reason. He says the saints and all the Praetorian Guard know about my imprisonment. You can see them back at the office. I got the Paul assignment today. What's that? I don't know, but if you don't want it, I'll trade with you because I was there last week and I think my life's being changed. I've had men come up to me before and say, Jerry, you got to pray for me. I'm the only Christian at my place of work and I'm miserable. I said, okay, both times. Put my hand on their shoulder. I said, Lord, look how miserable my brother is. Please just take him home to heaven right now. Just let him drop dead and take him home to heaven. Knock my hand off their shoulder. What are you praying? I said, there's two ways you can look at your circumstances. Either you're the only guy and you're miserable, or you're the only guy and you're strategically placed. Why don't you start praying and looking, keep your head on a swivel and look for what's going on. So anyway, I'm at home. And I'm saying there's people in your radar screen, Lord, who aren't on mine yet. And the garbage guy pulls up. 10 o'clock Friday. I realize he comes to my house every week. I don't even have to go looking for him. He comes to my house. So I wrote in my prayer list, garbage guy, and I started praying every day for the garbage guy. Next week, he's coming by. It's a hot part of the year. I had a glass of iced tea already in the fridge anticipating him. It was one of those trucks where they pull up and they come behind and they throw the garbage in a basket in the back, and when it gets full, then they throw it up into the big thing. He comes around to throw the garbage, and I'm already out there with the tea, and he's surprised to see me. And I say, you look like you could use a break. You drink the tea and I'll throw the trash. And I can see him out of the corner of my eyes looking at the tea. Who's this guy? You know, is it safe to drink this stuff? What's going on? You know. And I said, what's your name? He said, Mike. He has a name. I erased garbage guy and I put down Mike. Every week when he would come by, I had something cold for him to drink in the hot part of the year, something hot for him to drink in the cold part of the year, and hot in the cold part and cold in the hot part. And I know he liked me because once in a while he'd say, Jerry, I know you got small kids and I found these perfectly good toys in the garbage today. I bet your kids would really like them. He would save me toys from the garbage for my kids. I mean, it was just too cool. One day he came by and I'm praying for him. I mentioned him, you know, I'm praying for you and stuff. One day he came by at noon. I said, Mike, this is a little bit later than you usually come by. He said, yeah, I had troubles on my route. I said, well, have you eaten lunch yet? He said, no. I said, can I make you a sandwich? He said, yeah, that'd be great. He came in. I didn't know those guys could do that. He comes in and I make him a sandwich. You know what he did? He changed his route and came by at noon every week after that. And I was making him sandwich every week. And it was in that context we had the deep conversations. You know what happened to him? When he was a boy, at 8 years old, in his neighborhood, there was a woman who prayed for the kids in that neighborhood and had a backyard Bible club. And he remembered going to it, and he remembered praying the prayer. And his parents moved away 2 weeks later. Nobody ever followed him up. So we would have a meeting every week when he came by for lunch on his route, and we were doing follow-up. Wasn't long after that, he started going to church, and his wife and his 2 daughters all came to faith, and not long after that, he got traded off the route, and I had a new garbage guy, Mick. And there was Steve the mailman. He came by every day. And I just developed a relationship. I don't know what you do with your mailman if you're home, or mail lady if you're home, but you know what I do? What I do with them is I say, do you need to use the toilet? Jesus said a cup of cold water could do the trick. And I think to myself, maybe a toilet for a person who's on a route. And I have mailmen stop and use my toilet. You know, I give them, you want some hot coffee? You know, Wheaton, Illinois, it gets really cold in the winter. It's usually, it can get down to something like 45 degrees colder than your freezer in Wheaton. It's terrible. So anyway, this guy Steve was my mailman, and we had talk. You know, like I say, this should be going on in many places in your life. There's a lot of places where you have contact with people. You know, there's Mark, who is the cashier guy at the Walgreens. Sometimes I go in there, there's no line. We have conversations. We're moving along in this relationship. But Steve, in time, I was able to share the gospel with him, and he prayed to receive Christ with me. And then I said, Steve, you ought to come to church with us. He says, oh, Jerry, I'd love to, but I'm divorced and I have the kids on the weekends and it just wouldn't be appropriate. I said, our church has great stuff for kids. Your kids would love it. Why don't you come and then come to dinner afterwards, after church? Bring your boys. And after dinner, I got on my knees next to those boys and led both of Steve's boys to Jesus too. That doesn't always go well, you know. But if you're afraid of striking out, don't play baseball. But if you don't play baseball, you'll never know the joy of hitting a home run. You know, I don't know how to say it in the languages for sports events for people that are in other countries, but nevertheless, you get the idea. And to tell you stories, I got 1 million of them. 1 million of them. And the joy of it is so great. And you see these people grow, and it's so wonderful.